So once again, a really big thank you to everyone who's currently on the call as it stands. In our agenda, we had wanted to start off with a virtual poll, which would then lead on to the main debate and then onto another virtual poll. So at this time, with everyone who is still on the call at the moment, we are going to skip through many of the questions that we were going to explore in the virtual poll and simply go to our pre-debate poll, which is going to ask you to give your view in terms of where you stand in relation to the moment at this time. So for everyone who is on the call, we will kindly ask you to go on to the Menti code, which is menti.com 96 59 37 and 6, and ask the question in front of us, which is today, does the term BAME help to progress true diversity and inclusion? We're just going to give you a few moments and then we're going to move on to the main debate. Okay, so thank you to all who have responded so far in this conversation. And to that end, we are very, very happy to see that at this moment in time, the initial call is no. Most people have suggested that they do not think it does. That's then followed by too complicated to answer, and that's followed by yes. So that does suggest to us at this time that the team that are in favor do have some work at this time to kind of convince us. So we are going to smoothly move on to the main debate. And in order to do this, I'm going to speak about the rules of this debate. So I will be sitting in chair of this debate, and we have two teams, the proposition, who are in favor of this motion, who will be arguing that this House believes that the term BAME does not help to progress true diversity and inclusion. And we will have the side on opposition, who will be arguing that the term BAME does help to progress true diversity and inclusion. Each speaker is going to be given 5 minutes to make their speech, and we will have obviously the proposition speakers speaking one, and then we will have another speaker coming in from side opposition, and we will alternate between speakers from the beginning of the debate all the way through to the end of the debate. And to that extent, it is our real pleasure to be able to also talk you through the actual claps. So what's going to happen is that during the debate, each speaker is going to get a 5-minute speech. After 1 minute, I will clap, and this will highlight the time for the debate will actually be open, and actually people will be able to engage from the other side. And then after 4 minutes, you'll hear another clap. This will highlight that people from the opposing side will no longer be able to interrupt the speaker. And at 5 minutes, you'll hear, and this will highlight that actually the speaker will need to finish their speech. So to that end, those are the rules. And we're very, very happy to have all of you still on call. And so without any further ado, I'm really proud to call upon our first speaker from side proposition, which is Femi Williams.
Oh gosh, okay. Can everyone hear me? Yes, probably. I'm just going to talk anyway. Okay, so guys for joining us today. Sorry? Today, I'm basically going to talk to you guys about why the notion of BAME or the idea of BAME makes no sense in 2020. Number one, it's lazy. Number two, it lacks nuance. And number three, it lacks impact. So let's really delve into that. BAME, or grouping minorities together, is basically a term that was imposed on us. It's a term that allows white people to understand the concept of other. It is a term that makes it palatable for us as to group people together that are non-white. But let me tell you why this is harmful. All it does is reinforce power structures at hand. It reinforces this idea that if you're not white, you're a homogenous block, that we all have the same problems, the same issues, the same community, and the same culture, which obviously is not true. If I take myself as an example, I am Black, African. If I dissect that, I am Nigerian, I am Yoruba. And so I plead with you guys for nuance. I plead with you to see yourself with that same level of nuance. This term fails to encompass us as individuals to be identified. It assumes that groups together have historically experienced the same amount of oppression. But we've not all experienced slavery. We've not all been colonized. Not all our ancestors have experienced oppression or continue to experience it today. And even if you take all three...
that point.
Am I stopped? Sorry?
Just, I mean, so going with that thought and logic, Femi, are you saying to me that the term Black itself captures the whole of the Black experiences and is an appropriate term for that particular group?
Absolutely not. What I'm actually saying is that we need to be nuanced. Therefore, even if we've all experienced all these different boxes and notions of oppression, us within ourselves as Black people have nuance. For instance, the differences within the African community and the Caribbean community when it comes to education, workplace, employment. So again, I plead with you for nuance. How you see yourself as an individual is important. To reach true equality, we need to dissect the problems within our community when it comes to pay, housing, COVID deaths, education, and crime. As an example, for instance, the Chinese ethnic group tends to do 30% better than white people, whereas the Bangladeshi ethnic group tends to do 20% worse than that community. Black people and ourselves, we tend to do 23% worse than our white counterparts. And you guys as opposition, and what everyone on this call will hear is the opposition will say, oh, but it will help once one person gets on the line, then we can all get on the line and blah, blah, blah. But really, what can I say to you? Has that ever really worked? Is that actually a good example of an issue that's worked? And my colleague, Pravmeet, is going to explain that to you, giving more nuance in what that means to the workplace. Thank you. I think I'm done.
Thank you so much for that incredible speech. Really, really brilliant start to this event. So that was Femi, and she was the first speaker on side proposition. And again, just very quickly highlighting how this looks in a visual context. We've had the very first speaker on side proposition, which is Femi. And at that point, we are now happy to hand over to our first speaker from side opposition, who will be Felix Wong. So Felix, we're very, very happy to hand over to you.
Hi, everyone, and thank you. And thanks, Femi, for a great opening there. And in fact, some of what you say is something I'm going to pick on as well. So there are four main points that we on the opposition team would like you to consider in opposing this motion. The first is nuance, that this issue is complex, not binary. The second is context, that the term BAME is appropriate for some situations and absolutely has its place, and we'll show you how it continues to be an effective term in progressing the debate on diversity and inclusion. The third is collective power, and Karen will talk to the power of collectivism and the problem of splintering. And the fourth is distraction. Karen will caution us on the dangers of this debate at this time. So my first point, nuance. You all come from a level of sophistication in understanding issues regarding race. So I'm not going to address issues like BAME is not a race. We all know that already. We can move on. What we do invite you to do is to use your sophisticated understanding to consider that, like so many other things in life, this is not a binary choice. This is not a question of to BAME or not to BAME. It's subtler than that. Now, it's important to stress that using the term BAME is not incompatible with understanding that the Black experience is different to that of, say, the white experience or, say, the Asian experience. And in fact, while I've mentioned this term Asian, let's spend a moment appreciating that even the term Asian can have huge complexity. In the UK, the Asian experience can differ widely depending on whether you're Bangladeshi, Pakistani, Indian, and that's just the narrow UK interpretation of Asian. My heritage is Chinese Malaysian, and people sometimes forget that this is Asian too. I have no issue with the term Asian, even with how wide this term is. Just as I am Chinese, Malaysian, British, European, and Asian all at the same time and within different contexts, so am I proud to identify as part of the BAME community. There's a poet, Pat Parker, who wrote a poem called For the White Person Who Wants to Know How to Be My Friend. The first 2 lines of that poem go like this. The first thing you do is to forget that I'm Black. Second, you must never forget that I'm Black. Is that a contradiction? It's not, is it? I'm sure you get what she means. Yep.
There they were talking about being Black. Have you ever come across people actually talking about being BAME? Is this a term that people actually use to identify themselves? And if it's not, why is it useful?
As I've already said, I am proud to and happy to identify as someone that comes from the BAME community. I wouldn't describe myself as BAME on a census, and neither would anyone, because it isn't a race. And as I say, that's something that we can all get past. But it's absolutely a way of identifying ourselves as part of a collective, which is perfectly appropriate. I'll carry on. So this idea of, as per Pat Parker's poem, is it's not a contradiction. I'm sure that everyone that's watching this will get what she means. There's a way of thinking here that's complex and plural, and I'm inviting you to apply that same nuance to this debate. You can choose to have an instant hate of the term BAME, or you can look beyond it to the intentions and complexities. And I think we're all capable of moving beyond a binary cancel culture type of thinking around the term BAME. So with that in mind, let me move to my second point, that BAME has its place. When recruitment companies specialize in BAME recruitment, or when reports show that BAME students get worse marks at school and university, or more harrowing still, when studies show that patients from a BAME background suffer worse outcomes from COVID-19, we can choose to take umbrage at the term BAME, or we can choose to see the real message, that there's a commonality of experience that we share. Let me illustrate the useful context of BAME in business. Research shows that for 70% of BAME employees, career progression is important compared to only 42% of white British employees. Over half of BAME employees, 52%, believe they'll have to leave their current organisation to progress their career, and that contrasts with 38% of white British employees. As you can see, BAME is a great tool to highlight the differences between the experiences of majorities and that of a collective minority.
Just on that point.
Go ahead, Becky.
But if recent data is showing that 26% of Caribbean kids get strong passes at GCSEs and 44% of African ones do, then by using the term BAME, are we not clubbing together things that become quite unhelpful when put together to not actually see the problems?
No, there's no contradiction between seeing, between understanding the nuances as between.
I think he's frozen, but he was finished anyway in terms of time.
He had a few moments, but it seems like he is no longer with us. So he is by default at this particular moment in time finished. So we thank the speaker for his incredible speech. And again, just very quickly referring you to the chart so that everyone can see where we are at this time. We have had our first speech from Femi, our second speech from Felix. And so we are now going to turn back to the proposition side so that we can hear the second speech from side proposition, which will come from Prabmeet Singh.
Hi, everyone. I think it's very appropriate that you just said that Felix is finished on that point. With BAME, I think we're probably heading down the same route of losing our individuality. So thank you, Felix, for raising some very valuable points. But unfortunately, I think you missed some of the key things, which I'm going to talk about next. So using the term BAME, from my understanding, will not only slow down diversity within a social context, but also it's also going to deplete from a shareholder value in a long-term prospect as well. So that's something I want to talk about. And there's 3 key points. One is, why is it important not to use BAME as a catch-all at work? How do ethnicities suffer from different biases? And thirdly, what is the impact of language? So firstly, why is it important to have a detailed understanding of ethnicity rather than grouping them all as BAME? Let me ask you a question. If you put £10,000 of your own personal money into a company, and you wanted to know that that company is doing the best it can to grow, not least in the increasing complex and challenging market that we're currently in. Now, if you try and understand that the FTSE 100, they've got 75% of their revenues coming and generating from outside of the UK, and most of that is coming from Africa and Asian economies, then you would hope that there's somebody at least sitting in that boardroom that understands the cultural nuances that are specific to the markets that you're trying to operate in. There's no point hiring 10 Indians to get your BAME quota up, and the right approach actually trying to get into the Shanghai market. It's not really going to be very useful. Furthermore, diversity of thought is not of white and non-white. True diversity benefits from cultural and experiential, i.e. a lived experience of the uniqueness of each ethnicity. Every market you operate in, or indeed the market one day you hope to operate in. And masking ethnicity of the people in your organization like an umbrella term will not enable you or your shareholders to understand the strength of your team. Now, in a world where we are trying to break down data as much as possible, so much so that we even say data is more valuable than oil, then I'm afraid in your organization you have a significant oil leak, which you have to really consider now. This is not an argument that falls on the narrow shoulders of social justice, as we've seen so far this year, but also one that falls on the broader shoulders of good economics. Shareholder confidence that you have an organization geared up to face the world's challenges, not just in a market far away, but in a market close to home, knowing that over 30% of London is now very ethnically diverse. So some of my colleagues on the other side of the opposition side may argue, well, if BAME representation is that important, they can at least help once you get one member of BAME in to hire other minorities. Now, I'll ask you this question. Do you really think you want to live in a world where you put the burden of responsibility of a minority hiring another minority?
On that point.
An eye for an eye. Not yet, please. I'm just going through my points. I'll take it at the end if there's time. An eye for an eye will make the world blind. So my second point is people of different cultural backgrounds come from different experiences and different social biases applied to them. Now, I don't walk into a room and say, hi, everyone. My name is Pradmeet Singh. Nice to meet you. By the way, I'm BAME. I come from the land of BAME. It doesn't exist. And I know Felix touched on this, but we're living in a paradox where someone in a position of power says, I'm so passionate about diversity and inclusion, so passionate that I will actually define diversity for you. And unfortunately, Europe told its story to the world. And that's what it is. It is a story. The happily ever after of that story has manifested itself in what we see today as social biases, conscious biases. And the term BAME cannot help in breaking this barrier to diversity. Now, some may argue that BAME was defined by the minority community, and that's where it actually started off from. The problem is the intention of using that term. And 1 in 3 Oxford colleges in 2015 actually failed to enroll a single Black person. And this is the consequence of using this term. Talking about terms, let me tell you about language. Now, language has the power and the ability to control minds. Someone can swear at you, and that can affect your emotional state all day. It's just a word, but look how powerful it is. Now, language is used to normalize irrational thought. There's 6 billion people in Asia and Africa. Just try and digest that. 6 billion people out of a total of 7.7 billion. And by grouping everyone together as non-white, some homogenous group that must share similar characteristics, by adding them to our organization is not only ineffective, but I would go as far as saying it's irresponsible. It needs to be nipped in the bud before you normalize this language as socially accepted. You normalize this language. Now, learn in the English language, we know you is another way of saying sheep. It's hidden in there. So other words that you've seen: colony versus war, land grabbing, commonwealth versus stealing, expat versus immigrant. You see it every single day, and it's there to manipulate the mind. And here's the consequence of this language. Corporations have depletion of shareholder value in the long run. You don't know who's in that board. Secondly, in education, you've got entrances. Sorry, I'll come to your point in a minute. Education is restricted, and in health, this is life or death. This isn't just a point we're trying to make about economics. Grouping together puts lives, as we've seen in the COVID world, everybody is part of BAME, but they have specific understanding what happens to the Black, the Chinese, the Indian communities, and how do we deal with these individuals properly. In conclusion, the term BAME was set up with the intention of unity. What it's turned into, unfortunately, is uniformity. And to do the bare minimum to tick that box, when you do the bare minimum, you're going to get the bare minimum out. Sorry, I'll take your point.
So what term would you use instead?
Well, I wouldn't use a term, and that's the point. You'd want to understand, well, what is the basis of what your organization is made up of? What are the different ethnicities that make up? Now, if you're going to enter into the Ethiopian market, there's no point having 6 Chinese people and 2 Indians because you've met a BAME quota. That's something that you think is representative. You want to understand at the most minor level. You walk into any organization today and you see the importance of data and understanding how to use data. Why are we hiding it with BAME? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your speech. Absolutely incredible debate so far. And so to that extent, we're very, very happy to once again show where we are in relation to the debate. So we've had our first 3 speakers at this time. We've heard from both Femi, Felix, and Pradmeet. And that takes us to our final speaker that will have the
Horatio, has Felix been shortchanged at all?
We will come back to Felix.
Okay.
I do recognize
I was more or less there.
Felix, you will be given some additional time if you would like to use
Thank
it.
you. Sorry if that tech fail.
No worries. So we will go to Karen and we will follow up with additional time for Mr. Felix. Please, Karen, we will hand over to you.
Thank you. So in rejecting this motion, I will present 2 main arguments. The first is that the acronym BAME is and should continue to be a unifier and the basis for driving forward diversity and inclusion initiatives. And the second, and I think is a really powerful argument, is that the arguments about the use of the term BAME serves no purpose other than to distract us from our core issues as minorities, namely to the challenges we face and the actions that we need to take to address those challenges. So to my first argument, the unifying power of the term BAME. So my first contention is that the transformative power of collective action is an accepted and I trust uncontroversial fact. I'll run that by you again. The transformative power of collective action is a fact. So rarely is historic change a result of individual action. Take as an example trade unions. We have them to amplify collective voices. How many of you remember the Unison TV advert with the bear? Very quickly, a colony of ants wants a bear to move out the way. One calls out, "Excuse me," but isn't heard. Ditto the second and the third. Then a whole colony rushes forward and shouts, "Excuse me," and the startled bear jumps out of the way. The punchline being, if you want to be heard, speak in unison. So how does that translate to the issue at hand? Are we better off united under this acronym or splintering off with each group doing its own thing? Look at the stats.
Information.
Yes.
So your argument creates this framework that it's like white people and non-white people, and that's really what we're fighting against. And again, I would say that lacks nuance. The issues within us, even as individuals, as groups, as communities, we have different issues. And to kind of frame it in this framework that, oh, if one person helps, then we can all help, then it's not really the issue. We can be allies and issues within other communities, we can support them. That doesn't necessarily mean that the issues within our own communities. And that's why nuance is really important within this, for us to basically not frame it as it's them and us and BAME together as some collective, oppression.
So with respect, I think because I didn't actually finish my argument, you've rather missed the point, which is that I'm referring to the commonality of our experience as a unifying factor. We do have some common experiences. And I'm saying that if you look away from the superficial and just saying it's either white or non-white and look at how we can help each other, there are grounds in which we can do that. So I'm going to go back to my stats. If you look at the stats, 2011 census, there were 55 million people in the UK. Of those, 87% identified as white, and a surprising 13% were identified essentially as minority ethnic. So I think we can agree 13% is a statistically significant percentage. But if you break that down and just look at individual numbers, they become quite small. So Asian or Asian British Chinese, 0.7% of the population, Black or Black British, 3%, and so on. So if these groups were to rely solely on their own individual economic or social impact, it would be relatively minor. Whereas if you think about how the collective clout that that group could have, I think there is a potential for real change. Take the example further quickly and look at what we do. Look at the city. I think most of the people here work in city jobs. Most of us, I think, will agree, if we are minorities, know other minorities within our firm. Why? Because the startling reality is that there are very few. And if we try and speak up as individuals, whether we single ourselves out as Caribbean or African or whatever, it does not have the impact of us coming together as a group.
Sorry, point of information.
Yes.
Hi, so I was just going to ask, do you think BAME is exclusionary in any way, using that term?
So I will leave that till the end because I want to just finish my points and we can come back to that if we need to. What I'm saying is that in tackling inequality and dealing with these initiatives, we need strengthening numbers. And whilst admittedly not without grounds for criticism, so I'm not saying it's perfect, the BAME acronym does that by unifying us under a single, easily understood phrase. Why not some other phrase, you may ask? That leads me on neatly to my other point about the debilitating power of distraction. So the truth is that as minorities, we recognize we have an enormous amount of work to do in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. And the frank, often unspoken truth is that in doing that work, we do sometimes need to be addressed as a collective. So I reject the idea that the two are mutually exclusive, that you can't recognize ethnicity while at the same time sometimes using collective terms, which is what seemed to be suggested. We do sometimes need to be described as a collective, and the reality is we will not find a term that is appropriate or that everyone approves of.
Point of information.
So, yes.
You have an example of when we're able to use the term BAME, but also recognize our individual realities, like you've said.
I said that they were not mutually exclusive. I didn't say you'd use them at both at the same time.
Yeah, but you also sort of said that.
Sorry. I did address it because that was the point. We were talking about them not being mutually exclusive. Sorry. So what I'm saying is that these divisive, fruitless arguments about correct labels threaten to derail us at a time when we need to unite, and they're obscuring far more pressing and important issues. It is an unwitting and unwelcome distraction that serves no real purpose other than to hinder progress. So to conclude, because I know I need to, I can do little better than to repeat my primary and self-evident contention that we are stronger together. The BAME acronym, which I embrace, reflects that unity of intent and purpose and is a key weapon in our fight for racial equality and injustice. So let's shrug off the semantics, bypass the distractions, and embrace the term BAME. And to that end, I can only urge you, ladies and gentlemen, to oppose the motion.
Thank you for an exceptional speech, Karen. And to that end, in a moment, we are going to be going to our floor opportunity, and we will be using Menti to gather comments that we might have from the audience. But before then, and again, just for people's awareness, we're going to really quickly show you how that is going to operate. So as we have done throughout today, Menti will provide us with a code that we can go into, which will be 96, 59, 37, and 6. If you are a member of the audience and you would like to raise a comment, you will have an opportunity to do so. So feel free to ask us anything, and that will appear there very, very shortly. But before we come on to that, we would like to turn back to Felix to give him an opportunity to close out his speech, recognizing that he was prematurely stopped from being able to end his speech. So Felix, we will quickly hand over to you once more to have any final reflections that you will.
Horatio and all, thank you very much, and apologies again for the tech fail. Yes, just to remind everyone of where we were and where I was going. The point was that BAME is a great tool. It highlights the differences between the experience and the experiences of majorities and that of the collective minority. And you've heard more from Karen on that. And you might hear the suggestion, and you have heard the suggestion, that we should break down the constituent parts of BAME. And we don't necessarily disagree with that. But what we're saying is that if you break down, you can also build up. And the point here is that the identity and group we invoke should be right-sized to our needs and our causes. So summarizing those arguments, we oppose the motion because to suggest that the term BAME doesn't progress diversity and inclusion is a binary way of thinking that's inappropriate for a complex world. And secondly, that BAME continues to be a useful tool in understanding the differences between the majority experience and that of underrepresented minorities. Thanks.
And thank you so much. And so, as a really quick confirmation, it will be the case that all of the comments that you have sent are not going to be responded to immediately by the speakers. Rather, we are going to read out those comments and we are going to give the concluding speakers on both sides an opportunity to respond to them. So very quickly, I'm going to open up the screen and we are going to go through the comments that we have received at this time. So do bear with me as I open it up now. Here we are. So as it stands, the questions that have come in from the audience are, do the panel think with the advance of feminism that BAME males are more deprived? The second question is, what issues does Karen believe we are being distracted from by arguing against the use of BAME? The next question is, if there is so much disagreement on how we as ethnic groups see ourselves, how can we unite in future to bring about change? The next question is, do you think that the fact that the term is being disputed by those who it is meant to identify exposes its problematic nature? The next suggestion is there were mentions of BAME being a title imposed on us by white people. What could an alternative title that includes ethnic minorities in the narrative? Well, what could be an alternative title that includes us, ethnic minorities, in the narrative? The next one is there not a happy medium between BAME and then looking at Black and Asian minority ethnic lived experience? Also, is there in diversity? Okay, I'm not quite sure what that says there, but no worries. I think it's
within.
Within, yes, very, very good, within. Okay, then next one, how do we reduce the complexity that will occur in trying to report the large number of cultures that we would need to report on if no longer using the term BAME? The next suggestion we have is, isn't the issue anti-Blackness? The next is, both sides have made compelling points, but I agree with the opposition. The term gives us better collective bargaining and recognizes shared experience, but it doesn't prevent us from asserting and celebrating our individual experiences and identities. The next is, as Black people, we usually get lost within BAME and passed over for opportunity. How can the term BAME work in their favor? The next we have is the A supposed to include Indian and Chinese? I'm BAME and don't even know myself. So some really, really strong suggestions so far. I believe that we've covered all of the points that we have. We're just going to give it a moment. So if you have any further questions, please do feel free to enter them now. We're going to take the final few before we hand back over to our closing debaters from both sides so that we can wrap up today's debate. So the final question, or penultimate question, depending on if we get another one, that has come in is: great debate, fascinating arguments on both sides. Question for Felix. You say that we need to look beyond binary, but doesn't the term BAME create a purely binary choice, namely white and non-white? And then the final suggestion is I would draw a parallel with LGBT. Oh, and we've got a final one that snuck in. What is more important, the commonality of BAME experience or the uniqueness of our individual racial experiences? So to that end, some really fascinating questions for us at this time. And I'm very, very happy to, again, highlight to us the debating structure. So ordinarily, the proposition in a debate both opens a debate and closes the debate. So as we can see, that would essentially mean that Becky will be the last speaker, which will essentially allow us to go to Joel initially to give him the opportunity to close for side opposition before we turn to Becky. And so on that basis, it is my real pleasure to call upon Joel Semakula to close the case for side opposition.
So thank you very much, everyone, for sending in those comments. I'll try and address them as we go through my particular speech. But in terms of what I'm going to do today is I'm going to identify 3 points of clash between the two sides and show you why on every single one of these points it's clearly the opposition that has won this debate. The first is the term BAME harmful? The second is the term BAME useful? And the third is, well, is there something better than the term BAME? And I'll take each of these in turn. Starting first with, is the term harmful? Well, it's clear there's an issue between two sides on where the nuance is supposed to lie. We say that actually the issue is that this debate lacks nuance, that there's a suggestion that in having the term BAME, it's impossible to discuss the individual groups that make up the term BAME. Whereas the proposition, what you say here, that it's the term itself that's the problem. The BAME in of itself creates this monolith and this collective grouping of all of these individual groups that actually does more harm than it does any good. And our point here is simply, it's a point that Felix has made repeatedly. Our point is that it is possible to have both. And I'll deal with the utility of the term BAME when I come to the second point here. But mainly the in of itself, the term BAME represents some kind of shared commonality that does occur between all of these individual groups. And I know somebody from the floor made the point, what is the issue, our commonality, or is it our uniqueness? And we say it's not that simple, that actually both of these things are very important. And then as to the question of what is it anti-Black? Is it the sense that Black people get lost in it? Well, we say two things. The first is the term itself places Black people right at the beginning of it. But even more important than that, we say that actually, Black people are clearly a central part of this particular group. And actually there continue to be initiatives and continue to be support that center out where that particular group itself it does not necessarily get the support that it needs. And the question is, well, is it actually harmful to the progression of true diversity and inclusion? Well, we say if there isn't true diversity and inclusion, the issue here isn't necessarily the term BAME, but it's the laziness of those individuals who use that term or who are meant to when finding or trying to hit targets within their own organization and doing that ineffectively and don't actually take account of the individuality that can still exist while relating to that particular term. What we say the point is to build up rather than break down. The point here is to look for commonality here rather than look for pure division. But then this takes me really on to my second point here. It's the point of what is it useful? What's become clear, and this point was clearly made on the floor, is that for the purpose of, we clearly need something to describe the group that isn't the majority. And the term we seem to have opted for is BAME. And we say, well, look, if you look at COVID numbers, if you look at school results, there's clearly some common experience that's happened that's relevant to everybody who's not white. And that's relevant to determining what's going on within this particular group. And so not only is it useful, just say from a data and statistical purpose, and that's something that Pramit really didn't really discuss or address when making his points about what occurs in business. But we say it's relevant because it brings all of us together in a way that gives us increased power, and that's Black people and minority and ethnic people. When you break these groups down individually, they just don't have anywhere near the level and amount of power that they'd like, that they wish they have. And that collective bargaining from a bunch of people from different places that have different cultural references, but do have some kind of shared experience, actually ends up being better for diversity and inclusion for these groups as a whole than it does for being worse. And we also think it's useful just from a unifying aspect, just from the idea that when these people often find themselves in professional environments by themselves and can actually, and are made to think about other minorities in a way that shows some kind of kinness, that makes them, that gives them something within the workplace that we say really here is to be celebrated. And we say, well, look, and the proposition will say to us, well, nobody uses this term for themselves. Nobody would ever describe themselves as BAME. Well, we say, well, that's not really the point. That actually, there are plenty of people that clearly recognize themselves as a minority. And this particular term serves to further advance their particular agenda. And we don't accept the first proposition speaker's position that actually we don't need anything at all. It's become clear just in the way we deal with diversity and inclusion in this country. And if you compare it in this country, that actually it does matter that we have some general descriptor. And then the third point is quite clear. Well, is there something better? Well, I put that point directly to the second proposition speaker, and he couldn't come up or really give us something better. And the point is, we agree with the proposition, probably not on much, but at least on this, that language really does matter. And we agree that language should have nuance, and that language affects the way people see themselves. But we don't agree that BAME itself, that language is the particular problem. We say that actually the term BAME has been used for so long that it's easily understood, that it clearly allows, functions well within this diversity and inclusion debate, and that it's very difficult and it's going to be impossible for us to find some kind of agreement for some kind of alternative term. And that point was also made by somebody on the floor. And actually we say that time spent arguing and debating what term we should use instead of BAME is a distraction. And the question asked on the floor is, well, it's a distraction from what? Well, we say it's a distraction from actually the real issues affecting these individual groups. It's a distraction from understanding why perhaps Caribbean boys have lower different educational outcomes to other members of this group. Then actually those types of things should be our focus, or perhaps why Black people have different outcomes in COVID than some of these other groups. And actually we're able to continue to have those debates, and those are the things we should be focusing on. And that's what our second speaker was trying to allude to, rather than engaging in this debate about semantics and points about language where we're really not going to reach any kind of real agreement. And as the second opposition speaker clearly said to us, the point here is continuing with this debate does end up being divisive, and it does indeed end up being fruitless. We say, look, this debate's complex. We say that actually the term BAME itself is not harmful but helpful. We say that it's really useful in helping us understand this issue, and we can challenge the proposition all we want today. They will not come up with anything better, and for all these reasons I urge you to oppose this motion.
Thank you so much for your speech, Joel. Absolutely incredible end to the opposition side. And with that, we're very, very happy to now turn to our next speaker. And again, this is Becky, who will be closing the case for side proposition. So Becky Muinde, very, very happy to hand over to you to close the case that stands in your name.
Thanks, Horatio. Great. So you've heard various arguments from both sides tonight, and I want to just start with a few of the statistics that Horatio and others have shared. You know, 1 in 3 Oxford colleges not taking an African or Caribbean student, a £3.2 billion ethnicity pay gap, minority people 25% more likely to feel overlooked in their professional lives. What we have is a really serious problem, and one really happy fact is that the proposition and the opposition both agree that there is a serious issue here. The question then is, does the term BAME assist us in being able to look to progress and look to actually have truer inclusion and diversity? The proposition's been really clear with everyone tonight that we don't believe it does. And in terms of the way I want to go through trying to explain the strength of the proposition's case and how it's won out, I actually think the easiest way to do that is to just go through the points that the opposition have given us and to kind of individually, one by one, run through why those just don't work. But before that, I think it's interesting just to pick up a few of the points from what Joel was saying, because I think it's really interesting that we've got a kind of contradiction within the opposition case here. We have an acknowledgement and an agreement, which is nice with us, that language really matters. And yet at the same time, we have an argument that, well, don't get too caught up talking about language, because if you do, then you'll be distracted from talking about the real thing, because this is something that's just a historic term and it's probably fine to use it, right? So let's just, and I think that, you know, this idea that language matters, and that it was kind of picked up in a couple of the points made in the floor speeches, which I think go to the exact confusion and challenges we have with the term BAME, right? Somebody saying, you know, what's the A supposed to include? Great question. I'm a Cossack guy, I'm Irish, I'm traveller gypsy. We're talking about communities with really significant issues here, but ones who would naturally probably not at all see themselves in the term BAME. And that's not their fault. We on the proposition say, you know, any minority should be able to feel represented in a term which is supposed to be for collective action for minority peoples. We end up with one of two situations. One is that BAME is some semi-specialist term for people who are Black, people who are Asian, depending how you understand Asian, we don't know what the A is, and general minorities. And it's not quite clear why, as Joel himself said, Black is first. If I was from somewhere else, I wouldn't really understand that, but fine. But so we were told it's nuanced and not binary, but that point really seems to go into the second, which is, because if it's nuanced, we need to see what that nuance is actually sort of helpful for. And then that went into, well, it's helpful in some places. And the places we were told it was helpful was in things like education and COVID. Well, as per my point of information, actually in education, we see that it really distracts from issues. We see that Bangladeshi children often do terribly badly. We see that Caribbean kids, and particularly Caribbean boys, underperform African girls to a huge degree. So we are obscuring facts. COVID is another situation where we on the proposition are saying there's been a huge obscuring of the issues. Chinese people less likely to die than white people. Well, using the term BAME in no way helps us there. And then we have this point about the power of collective action. Well, I think it's interesting that, you know, historically in the 70s, when the term BAME was started, we had about 2% Black people in the census. That's not the position now. 14 is a lot more than that. And if we want collective action, we on the proposition are explaining that collective action needs to be collective action of all minority people. We've made a strong case on the proposition for the fact that this is lazy terminology, for the fact that this really lacks nuance, that if we want to be, and let's use the UK here, if we want to be a global powerhouse, and after what we've heard from Rishi today, we really need as much help as we can get, then we need to be having boards where we're properly understanding who it is who is representing our organizations, having, as we had Pradeep tell us, a bunch of Indian people going to Ethiopia isn't going to help. If we think diversity is important, we think diversity by the representation of every group is important. The problem with the term BAME is that, Joe, I don't think you get to do that in this bit. But the problem with the term BAME is that it doesn't help at all with that. And then when we talk about the fourth point that was given to us by the opposition, this problem that this isn't the right time to have this debate. Actually, what we've shown you on the proposition side is that this is exactly the right time to stamp out the use of the term BAME, because there's a serious issue. We know that for shareholder value, we know that for the sake of actually being able to do things that are important, we need to do better, and we need to do better for people who would identify as Black, Caribbean, for Indian, Chinese. There needs to be a better solution than the one we have. And we on the proposition, on that basis, say no to BAME. It's not helping, it's actively hindering.
Thank you so much to Becky for an incredible set of arguments made there to close the case that stands inside proposition. So to that end, we are very, very happy to come back to you, the audience. We've heard from side proposition who are in favor of the motion. We've heard from side opposition, and obviously we've been speaking to the motion. This House believes that the term BAME does not help to progress true diversity and inclusion. So you will now have one further opportunity to vote for the motion, i.e. the idea that you do believe that BAME does not help to progress true diversity and inclusion, or to vote inside opposition in suggestion that actually it does help, to progress true diversity and inclusion. So on the screen, we are once again going to be sharing the poll and giving all of you the opportunity to vote once more. And some of you have already started that process. So no had led in the previous, and we will see what happens this time round. So it has been a fascinating event and a fascinating conversation on both sides. I can see all of the speakers intently watching as their fate is decided by those who are digitally voting at the moment. But we highlight that this is a conversation, and we know that the reality is not necessarily as binary as we've placed it here. But we do think that the quality of conversation that we've been able to have by being able to frame it in this way and encouraging us to explore the polarity of the conversation that we had in front of us was very, very interesting. Thank you to all of those who are continuing to vote. We still have a situation where no seems to be at the front at the moment. Yes, in second, catered to answer is lagging behind a little bit. We will continue to keep the poll open for a few more moments. And very, very shortly, we are going to be returning back to our colleagues at Aon, particularly Maxine Goddard, who is going to be saying a few words for us as we kind of come to a close. So we're just going to wait until we get to over the 50 mark to see where that leaves us. So we are now at 52, and we can see that there is a kind of, it's much closer than it was previously. So yes, has been able to make some inroads, and no seems to still be in the lead at the moment. We will again return to the poll later to see if there is any further difference by the time we come to the very end of our conversation today. But at this time, we are very, very happy to hand over to Maxine.
Thank you, Horatio, and you're clearly the coolest dude under pressure. Everyone, iCAN is usually known for its exciting and immersive events in collaboration with Aon. I can assure you, dinner and the show was not on the agenda today, but I'm grateful that many of you dialed back into the program, and I hope that you really enjoyed the debate. No one likes labels. And, you know, this is something that's exploded pretty much this year, you know, this discomfort around the use of the term BAME, but it has actually been around for a long time. And I hope, regardless of what side you are on, you took some takeaways today around how complicated and complex this matter is. You know, language matters. You heard it from both sides. You know, is it helpful? Is it unhelpful? Are we being pedantic? Is it a distraction? You know, or is it simply in 2020 just completely, you know, ridiculous to be grouping people in these terms? In an attempt to be inclusive, we probably have become exclusive and have created a divide. So I'm grateful to the two groups today, led by Becky and Joel. Thank you for the wonderful arguments. I think you might have swayed some people in their thinking. It's always challenging to, you know, articulate on such an emotional topic with regards to race and racial discrimination. So I'm pretty sure that today those debates helped with helping to articulate some of those thoughts and verbalizing how we position ourselves on these arguments. As a BAME person myself, and I use that term only because of the debate, I don't use that term for myself. I'm Black Caribbean, I'm from Barbados. And so I try not to get offense. I understand the statistical purpose of the word, many of us do, but it is largely a term that, you know, is unhelpful when you're referring to people as BAME in normal speak. Perhaps leave it within the statistical purposes of the term. So I'd like to say thank you to Aon, to Julie, Page's CEO, and the team, Catherine, Palumi, Shiva, and Alicia, who put this all together. Thank you to the very cool Horatio today, who's been leading this debate. Thank you to the entire team, Femi, Joel, and Felix, and the team. So really enjoyed the discussion. I hope you all did. Femi, you were fantastic. Thank you for joining us. And Prabmeet from Willis, thank you so much. It's been wonderful hearing you all, and Karen. You know, thank you all for joining us. iCAN again apologizes for the hacker bombing that occurred at the beginning of this program, but I hope you got some takeaways today. I certainly did. And I'm looking forward to the next iCAN Aon event without the disruptions. Look out for the iCAN survey. We usually follow up to get your thoughts so we can plan and repurpose ourselves in the year ahead. Thank you again, and appreciate you joining the call and for your patience today.
Thank you so much, Maxine. And so all that remains is for us to come to our very, very final segment in the conversation today, which is the call to action. And so to that end, I'm going to once more share our final screen with you today. And I would like to echo all of the words that have been highlighted by Maxine just there, that it has been an incredible debate. Now, again, from everyone at iCAN and YDWC, we apologize for, again, the hacker bombing and the disgusting material that we saw previously. However, hopefully that hasn't been able to stop us from having a really important conversation. My mom always says to me that it's when you are about to do something incredible that the most interesting things will try to come out of the woodwork to try and derail and stop and to prevent. And actually, the conversation that we've had today has been incredibly important. We know that words matter, the framing of BAME is important, and actually the conversation that we've had today, which has been able to explore both sides, has been really, really important. And so having had all of the statistics and the underlying conversations that we've had around the importance of advocating for race, racial equality, and being able to actually listen to all of the different sides that we've had today, we leave you with a few words to consider. So the first thing is for all of those who are interested and thinking, motivated by everything that we've heard today, what is it that I can do? The first is sign up to iCAN. And again, the link will be made available via the email that will follow up after. An incredible organization with incredible things that they're achieving at this point. The second is to join YDWC. And again, with our focus on diversity and inclusion, we will continue to be raising the banner for a wide variety of conversations and hoping that we continue to take this message forward. The next thing you can think about is if you are an individual, we all take the responsibility for doing three things: continuing to learn about diversity and inclusion, the issues, the challenges, the opportunities, to think about the ways in which we can adapt our working actions and the ways that we go about what we do in order to ensure that we are as inclusive as possible. And finally, that we take the time to empower others, whether that's as an ally or as a person who is being able to watch out for others who are needing opportunity, who are needing sponsorship, who are needing coaching. We take the time to create those environments. And finally, as an organization, there are three things that we think about. One, how is it that we continue to transform our recruitment processes? Two, how is it that we continue to build the most inclusive culture possible? And three, what can we do to aid the progression of talent from diverse cultural backgrounds? So, there are no easy answers to anything that we've discussed today, but we appreciate the time that you have all taken to be part of this conversation. We hope that everyone leaves this conversation with a renewed vigor to be able to take this diversity and inclusion agenda forward. We're grateful that we're able to do this together, because the YDWC slogan is, we go fast alone, we go far together. Thank you all for your time. Good evening.